Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today, instead of giving our hot take review on a game we just finished playing, we're going to talk about our top 5 games with integrated themes. These are the games where the theme really shines in the mechanisms. You feel like you're doing the thing while you're playing the game. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes. Before we jump into that, though, I do have some poll results to discuss. Every week on Twitter, I ask a poll question, and this week I asked, have you ever discovered or developed a very strong relationship, maybe a friend or a partner, through board games? Now, the reason I asked this question is because last week we asked a question about bad behavior in board games and got a lot of interesting responses. It was really fun to hear about real life situations people were dealing with. But I wanted to go a little more positive this week. So let's hear about some good people, good things that have come out of board games. If you want to engage with these polls, join us on Twitter at BG_hot takes. I also had a listener reach out to me and say, Twitter sucks these days. Can you at least put these up on Facebook as well? And I think I can try to do that. So I'll try to start putting these on Facebook as well. So if you follow us on Facebook or you want to, find us there. Listen, I hate using Facebook, but it's an opportunity to do something other than Twitter.
But Twitter, your days are numbered.
Have we gotten back to the point where Facebook is now better than Twitter?
I don't know. I don't know that it's better, but some people are using that and they're not using Twitter. So we'll get a few options in here. I don't know. It's going to make my calculations more complex. I'm going to have to start adding numbers and multiplying and doing all kinds of. The results are not going to be right if I do that. But anyway, so here's how people answered. The first option I gave was yes, I met a spouse or partner through board games, and 5.9% said that. 44.7% said yes, I met a close friend. 31.9% said I strengthened a relationship. And 17.6% said nope. Sorry for you guys. Try harder. No, I'm just kidding. How did you guys answer this question?
Well, my answer, I forget how I actually answered it on the poll. I think I said something snarky probably. But in reality, the answer is 2, making a good friend and strengthen a relationship, because I think, Tim, you and I were actually friends before we started playing games together. But no doubt, I mean, you and I have a stronger friendship now for having played games.
Right on.
And it's a common interest, which I think, a common interest is always a great way to help strengthen a friendship. And then we brought in Adam, and now I'm good friends with Adam. And so I feel like gaming has just been an absolute delight in my world. Because I've got, a couple of great friends. And I think now that I've moved to Portland, a lot of the people that I know here are people that I know through gaming. So gaming has just been a really terrific friend-making opportunity for me.
Yeah, I'm the same, Chris. I think I met some friends and strengthened relationships, especially with you two guys. And Chris, what you put was actually really touching to me. You're softening it up a little bit. And what you said just now is actually really touching. So thank you for that. I'm glad that we got to meet through board gaming, both you and Tim. That's how we met. And I consider you guys very close friends now. And what a way to do it through board gaming. It's been fun. So that was very touching on Twitter and just now. So thanks, Chris. I'm happy to be part of your guys' circle.
Yep, same here. Same exact answers. Adam is one of the only people I vacation with this year, twice, or at least like 2 times a year. Basically, we're shooting for at this point, and that's because he's a good friend, and met him through board gaming and because of board gaming. And obviously, I spent a lot of time with you guys, even if it's just virtually on video. I probably spend as much or more time with you than anyone else in my life, other than maybe Danielle and Jen. Any adults anyway. Met some close friends this way. Also, I would say it strengthens relationships. Like, I spend more time with my family who lives across the country. We get on, video chats and get on Board Game Arena and play games together on Yucatan, play games together. My brother, who plays with us regularly, Steve, he's, I definitely spend more time with my brother because of board games. So I would definitely say that it strengthened a lot of relationships. I met close friends. I didn't meet a spouse or partner through them, but luckily my spouse or partner is game to play with me, and we have a lot of fun with it because of that as well. So I think lots of good positive stuff that comes out of board games for me. Now, we had a lot of responses this week, and I'm going to just bear with me because I'm going to read a number of them. But if you want to check out more of them, there's a lot of other great responses that I won't be able to get to today. Again, follow us on Twitter at BG_hot takes and check out all the other responses there. And next time, come out, give us your own response. We'd love to hear from you. The first person who responded was Alex McKenzie. And this is the Meeple and the Moose podcast. He said, my closest friends where I live now are from my gaming group. We met via a local Facebook group in 2015 and have been gaming in the regular ever since. We've been with each other through job changes, births, marriages, and divorces. Yeah, that's some good friends. You experienced some big life events together. Board Game Chatterbox said, I've used party games to help strengthen some strained team relationships and work, and I'd like to call myself a friend of your show. You're absolutely a friend of our show. And that's actually something else that I didn't call out. I've met a lot of really great people by doing this show, by being on Twitter and interacting with people on, in the board game community. Some people that I spend a lot of time with virtually that I've never met in person are through board games as well. So I've met lots of friends there, a lot of our listeners that I would definitely call friends, and that's awesome. Daniel said, I got a job because of board games. I would love to hear some context on that, Daniel. Leave some notes on the Twitter post when I post this show, because I'd love to hear how that happened. That's cool. Bray Frank said, 2 of my best friends are people that I met through Magic. We're still friends to this day, although we now play Euros instead of Magic. Right on. Also, not a board game, but my wife and I started dating due to our mutual love of Mario Kart. Mario Kart's a great game, great way to get introduced to somebody and fall in love. Love it. Arwin, the host of the Cardboard Time podcast, said, lots of close friends, but also my girlfriend after a failed first attempt at getting my attention. See the Power Grid incident of 2018 during a game night. We had a game night shortly after that where we courted each other over a game of Azul. And I love the old-fashioned use of the word courted there. Evokes some great passion and excitement. Justin Sheffer said, I met my spouse through a game of Risk. Our first date drinking coffee in town didn't ignite the spark, but an epic battle for the continent of Africa did. That's amazing. I love it. Anna Marie Phelps, who is a board game designer, but also has been a content creator in the past. I think she's not doing that now, but I started up a really popular channel called Girls Game Shelf, I think. But she said, I literally met Benita K through board games. I replied to a question in an international game group about running a regular game night. And when she realized I was one town over, she asked for my address. We played till 2 a.m. Benita responded, the moment when you take a chance on a stranger and don't get murdered. Woohoo. And Anna Maria said, LOL, right? Like, I just gave the woman my home address. I hope she really does like Ticket to Ride. That's a great story. And yeah, sometimes, you got to take a chance. I think honestly, like, that's kind of a big part about making friends in any hobby is like, you got to take a chance and be like, hey, we got to share. You want to get, like, I did that with Adam, right? The first day we went to this shared meetup group. We didn't even play a game together, but I was just chatting with him for a few minutes beforehand. I was like, hey, here's my phone number. I'm going to let you know when we're having a next game day at my house. So kind of just randomly put myself out there, and look at that. We got a 2-year podcast relationship going here. So.
And I was like, yeah, this guy just gave me his phone number, invited me over to his house. What a weirdo, but whatever, I'm going to go. So who's the real weirdo?
You showed up.
Yeah. That was fun. I'm glad you took that risk, Tim.
And then the last one here is kind of personal for me. This is Mike. He said, okay, so I've known Tim and Steve since 1991, 2-ish, when we met in high school. Super close for 20 years. Tim was my best man at my wedding in 2005. Tons of games of all kinds, video, board, card, drinking, so many good times and stories. Then he moved 2,000 miles away to California, and we slowly drifted apart over the next 10 years. Still seeing each other here and there, but not like it was, as expected. But when Danielle, that's my wife, posted that he was starting a board game podcast, I knew I had to listen. It was awesome to hear his voice again every week, and with a podcast this good, I was instantly addicted. Now, over the past year or so, we've been playing a bunch of games on BGA, and I truly feel like we're reconnecting again. What I'm saying is I chose strengthen relationship, and for that, I'm thankful. Tim, I love you, man. Mike, that was so awesome to hear. And it truly, like, we really have reconnected over the last year, playing games together. Ever since the podcast started up, he started texting me, letting me know he was listening. And it's so cool that you got involved. Mike and I used to play Magic together for years. But as he mentioned, we played all kinds of things. We played drinking games. We played Mario Kart together. We played Uno like when I was 18 years old in my first apartment. We played Uno on spiked coffee at 2:00 in the morning. Like, so many good memories of games, and it's so fun to reconnect through board games. So yeah, board games, what a cool hobby to get to know our friends. All right, so let's jump over to our main topic today, which is our top 5 games with integrated themes. Now, this is a topic that we're all pretty excited about, I think, because we often talk about theme and how theme has an impact on the enjoyment of a game for us, and how we love when the theme kind of fits into a game. And I often find myself talking about that as we're playing a game, but like, oh, it's so cool that they made that thematic link there. So we wanted to call out some of the games, but I have to admit that this topic was really tough for me, because as I'm thinking through games that have some integrated themes into the mechanisms, I can also find a dozen mechanisms in that game that doesn't integrate. I think in general, games have to kind of abstract a little bit. So it's cool when they do tie into the theme, but they just can't do it perfectly. So, I think we have to acknowledge that up front. And as I'm talking through my list, I'll kind of talk about the integrations that work well, but also some of the things that just missed. And you just have to understand that it's abstracted a little bit, and it's just in the service of streamlining the game and things like that. Anyway, how was this list for you guys? Did you have any trouble making it?
I actually had some trouble making it. And part of the reason for that is because you guys took a lot of the games that I would have used. So there's that.
Yes.
Secondly, I didn't want to talk about the same games that I talk about every time. So there are probably some games that I might have put on the list that I didn't choose to put on the list because I've talked about the game a dozen times, a million times. And I don't want to keep saying the same things over and over again. So I purposely made a point of finding games that were maybe a little bit off the beaten path, or I hadn't talked about before, or did something a little bit different. So as with always, there's a caveat on these lists. And the caveat this time is this isn't necessarily my list of these are the absolute top 5, like best of all time, because that list has partially been taken up, and partially that list is stuff that, that I just don't want to keep repeating. So I think these are all games that deserve attention for the way that they've integrated their theme and the gameplay. And I think that's good enough for the list tonight.
Yeah, I had a fun time making this list. It was like you were saying, Tim, you can find some games that just, oh, this makes sense and this makes sense. And then, oh, this one little part here, that doesn't really fit along with anything else in the rest of this theme. But then you can like kind of justify that little wacky part, that little nuance, and to why it might work out in a theme. I like those little oddities that don't quite fit, but you make an excuse for it. Like, oh, this is what's really happening there. And you make it fit into the theme. So I think that was kind of fun, finding what works with the theme and what doesn't. I'm interested to know, what does thematic mean to you guys? I had to think about that a little bit more. And for me, it was the theme of the game assists with the rules explanation, or vice versa. The rules explanation makes sense thematically, like that. Oh yeah, that is how you would do such and explore space. That makes a lot of sense that they do it like this. So just something that helps with the rules, and it kind of guides the flow of the game. So that's what I try to figure out for a thematic link.
Yeah, that's a good point and a good example of how theme is tied into the mechanisms and how it's useful. But I wasn't really looking at that. I was more looking at like, are the actions we're doing, does it feel like the story is being told of what is the theme, what's happening here? And I'll give an example, and you'll see a couple of these on my list. But I think worker placement is a real obvious example of where taking the action ties into theme, but it's a mechanical thing, right? You're using one worker to do one action. It kind of translates to real life. Hey, I can only produce so much stuff, and I have to use limited resource. One of those resources is the labor to do it. And so I'm going to use this one person to go do this task, and this other person is going to go do this task. And so worker placement, I think, is a really great example of how I think you can take a mechanism and turn it into a thematic link. And I've got a couple examples of that.
Yeah, I think for me, my definition was probably pretty similar to what Tim was doing. And the first time that I ever noticed a link between theme and mechanisms, I think, was early on when I started playing games. And one of my favorite games was, and probably still is, Wingspan. And there were a couple cards where I just said, that's so clever, that's so cool, the way that the particulars of a bird worked into how that bird operated. So, for example, the vulture, that it's a carrion eater, it's a scavenger, so you don't need to feed it anything because it's going to get its own food. Or the bird that lets you put an egg in a different nest because that's what they do in real life. That bird goes around kind of stealing the nests of other birds and putting their eggs in them. And that's the kind of thing where I think theme and play integration really shines, when to me, there's always this aha moment of, oh, that's so clever. I think that's so cool. Now, one thing that I do want to distinguish here is just straight up theme and production, because I think we've talked about theme and production before, and that's a very different topic than theme and mechanics. So I was actually talking to my son about this episode today, and he said, "Oh, you're going to throw Return to Dark Tower in there, right?" And my answer was no. So, spoiler alert, I'm not going to talk about Return to Dark Tower, but that was a production thing. I think that game has a great production, and I think the production works terrifically with the theme, but I don't think there's necessarily a huge tie-in between the mechanics and the theme, because that's an entirely different question. And there are plenty of games out there that have great themes that I love from their thematic perspective, but they're not necessarily games where that's reflected in the gameplay itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Chris, that you picked Wingspan as a choice here, because you're linking the theme that's on the cards and how those those individual cards have a story that they're telling because of the way that the mechanisms work related to that specific card. And but generally Wingspan, I think thematically, I have a hard time saying the action I'm taking is linked to the theme. But my first choice here, I'm going to start with number 5, kind of ties that in. It's a mix of like linking the actual mechanisms to the theme, but also using cards in some ways to give you flavor, to give the theme, to help the theme carry through. And my first choice is Clank, or the Clank series. Really, any one of these games would work just fine. Now, I think you could probably use almost any dungeon crawler here, because the concept of a dungeon crawler is that there's a spatial relationship, right? You're telling a story of like somebody's moving through this space, and they're moving into new rooms and they're exploring. And so I think you could have used something like Descent, or you could use Gloomhaven and say that there's a thematic link to that. I chose Clank mainly, I think, because I was actually playing Clank Catacombs, the newest version of Clank, this week. And it just got me thinking how thematic a lot of the stuff you're doing is. In Clank Catacombs specifically, as you move through this dungeon, you're revealing new spaces, right? You don't know what the dungeon looks like until you get there, and then you reveal it, and then you have new opportunities to do things. But I think the idea that you're actually getting to experience this character moving through a space, finding new things, discovering them, deciding what to do with them, deciding how to interact with them. That's the mechanical link. And then you have all these cards, and all of them kind of drive the theme a little bit too, right? Depending on which type of character you meet and how you interact with them, how you spend your skill points to add them to your deck, and how they show up more. There's a lot of great theme that carries through in that experience, and you can kind of feel yourself being this little rogue running through a dungeon, stealing stuff from the dragon and trying to get out before it attacks you. So I like the thematic link there in Clank. Now, as I mentioned, though, a lot of these games, there are some things that just don't make sense. Like, why are you in the middle of a dungeon and there's a market where you can buy stuff from? Who's sitting out there selling stuff in the middle of a dungeon, right? Everything doesn't make sense, but I think that just gives you some more fun options in the game. But anyway, I really like the Clank series, and I'll be talking more about Clank Catacombs on our next episode, because what a cool, kind of update to the Clank experience, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Well, first of all, Tim, Clank is a great addition to any list in my book. I always love to hear Clank on a list. And second of all, I went to Carlsbad Cavern once, and down there in the middle of this underground cavern, there actually was a gift shop and a cafe. So I think that answers your question about who's selling stuff down in the middle of the catacombs.
A couple points I want to make before Chris goes on, like that. As Tim was describing this, I was thinking about spelunking or cave exploring is a perfect like dungeon crawling theme. And I think one of the things about my list in particular is it picked, I don't know, semi-real premises for my game, whereas Tim starts off with this imaginary premise that can't even happen. So I think that's just an interesting difference right out the gate. That's funny.
Chris, I do appreciate that you're trying to one-up me on my Teotihuacan experience by talking about Carlsbad Caverns right off the bat here today.
Well, sticking with the slightly less than believable theme, my number 5 game was Golem, which was designed by Flaminia Brazzini and Virginio Gili and Simone Luciani, with art by Francesco Ciampi and Roberto Grasso, and published by Cranio Creations. And this is a game where I think there's a lot of stuff in here that's basic worker placement, and there's some things that don't make any particular sense from a thematic standpoint, like, why are you dropping a bunch of marbles into a synagogue? But then there were a few things, in particular the use of the golems themselves, that I think are absolutely brilliant. So, for example, for those who have not played the game, in Golem, you are a rabbi in, I believe, 18th century Prague who's trying to use golems, which are creatures made out of clay, in order to help work for their people. And these are creatures, these are otherworldly, sort of, I don't even know, magical creatures. And so, magic gets out of hand, right? And so you have your workers, which are your rabbi and your students. And then you have these golems. And these golems, they get more and more powerful. And the more powerful they get, the more stuff they can do. But if they start getting too powerful, they start getting too far out there in front of the students who are supposed to be controlling the golems, then you start having to pay a price for that. And ultimately, you may have to destroy your golem in order to get them back under control again. And I just remember playing that game and feeling like I was in the middle of that story. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. In particular, that mechanic. And is that him shaking his head?
It's a lot smaller shake of the head than I want to do, Chris. This game has like zero theme in it. I couldn't understand what was going on. There's 3 streets there's only 3 streets in Prague that we can go down, and we can't like change lanes. We can't go this way, or we're stuck going down these one street, and we have to have our golem on a leash or something. I don't understand it. Tim, how did this land thematically for you?
Adam, first of all, there's often you were talking about how little you understand about games as we're talking about them. So this isn't
right. That's a common theme here. Yeah.
but no, Chris, I actually thought briefly about Golem because I do like the idea of the golems running away, and they make some. They tie the mechanisms into the theme in that aspect, but then I couldn't get past the idea that you're dropping marbles down the cathedral, and then that's how you pick what actions you're going to do. So there's just too much disconnected in mechanisms and theme for me to have chosen it, but I can completely understand why you picked it, and I appreciate it.
Well, like you said, every game has its strengths and every game has its weaknesses. That one, the strength is the golems. The weakness is, why is anybody dropping marbles into a synagogue? Which is a good question for anybody.
Okay, the first game of the night that has a premise that actually makes sense and happens is Envelopes of Cash by Andy Schwartz and Envelopes of Cash, LLC. I've been talking about this one a lot lately. Basically, the premise is you're a head coach driving around the country in a bus to recruit the top high school athletes via any means necessary. So that includes you can bribe them with bling. You can give them a fancy car with a scrub title, of course. You pay off their family's bills, or you can pay them off with some high-end whiskey, or you just use classic cash in an envelope. How thematic is that? Already this makes sense. The game is played over 12 months, so each round you're kind of recruiting any potential regional fundraising that you can draw up. You're playing those guys down, and that's your tableau of income of legitimate, illegitimate funds that you're going to use to recruit these players. But it is played over 12 months, and you're supposed to be the head coach driving around. Don't you have to coach for like 6 months out of the year? So that part's a little like, oh, what's going on there? Also, you have specific roster spots you need to fill. I like that. You can't just go willy-nilly around the country picking up kickers and punters. No, you have to get an outside linebacker, and you have to get a running back. You have to get a quarterback. You have to get a special teams guy. So you have to fill all these specific positions if you want to do better. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of alluded to it, the board is broken up into different regions. So each head coach has a little bit of an advantage in their home starting region. You can go outside those regions and pick up some more recruits. And it's going to be difficult for a West Coast guy to go all the way to the East Coast and get an East Coast guy to come around. Unless that guy, that thematically makes sense. Unless that East Coast guy has some connections out on the West, it's probably not going to happen. They're going to be more prone to stay in their region. And then there's also these border regions between the two regions where those players could go either way, and they're hotly contested. You can get a little more, you can recruit a little quicker and easier out of those border areas. So it's kind of like a clash of two, Titan schools. USC and Louisiana might be looking for a recruit somewhere in Texas. Which way is that recruit going to go? So I like that whole idea. A part that I don't know, here's one of those little things. I'll force it into the theme. You can go to Vegas. You can put wagers in Vegas and bet on these die roll and try to get a bunch of income if you get a hit on those. I don't know. Does Andy Schwartz know something about head coaches? Do they all have a little bit of a gambling problem? I don't know how that quite fits in there, but I think it's a fun mechanism either way. And that's Envelopes of Cash, very thematic, a situation that I feel like occurs on the daily, and the rules make use of that, and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, first of all, Adam, just because a game is thematic doesn't mean it has to be set in reality. And this may be set in reality, but from my perspective, it sounds like a sci-fi fantasy book because all the terminology you just used doesn't make any sense at all to me. I think you're making it all up. Have no idea if this is thematic or not.
What a shame.
And Adam, come on, the Las Vegas thing. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying you could throw that into any game. Clank in space, but we're gonna stop off in Las Vegas and see if we can get a few extra bucks. And
all right. I see how this night's going, Chris.
Yeah, seriously. Adam started by painting a target on his back.
That's right, he did.
No one's trying to pick any fights here, but
my number 4 is this is going in the sci-fi route. So again, not super realism based, but it is, I think, very thematic. And I feel like every time I'm playing it, you can just feel the theme dripping. And that's Eclipse, Second Dawn for the Galaxy. Probably the original version of Eclipse works just as well. But again, you've got some of that, the spatial relationship. You're moving these ships, you're moving these items around space. When you move into a space, you're interacting with other players who are in that space. You're discovering things. There's the exploration aspect of it. You're moving into a space. You don't know what's out there in deep space. You got to flip it over. And then you're using your income, basically your money, to kind of fund all of these actions you're doing. So every action you're doing is going to cost you some amount of money at the end of the round. And that makes sense. If you're running a planet, if you're running a species, you got to, pay for all the stuff you're doing, whether that's building ships, whether it's upgrading ships, whether it's moving around the galaxy. All this stuff costs money. So there's a thematic link there. And with Eclipse, I think it does it better than most of these kind of 4X or sci-fi type of games. Like I wouldn't have called Gaia Project out here because it's so abstract. But Eclipse is great. I mean, you're literally like, building, discovering technology and adding them to your ship. You're building out these blueprints. You're making your ships better. So obviously there's still a lot of abstraction, but I always feel like it feels like I'm in a big epic space battle when I'm out playing Eclipse. So I feel like it really ties into me.
Completely agree. But Adam, you're the tough sell tonight. What do you think?
Well, this absolutely happens in different galaxies all across the universe. So we know this is out there occurring, and there's all these alien species fighting over control of the galaxy. That makes total sense. It's happening right now.
Alrighty then. So my number 4 game is Nunami by Tomasi Maniok. It's a self-published game, and it's one that I talked about a long time ago. Tomasi Maniok is an Inuit designer who has said that he was intending to bring an Inuit sensibility to this game, which is largely about the balance between humans and nature. And in this game, you're playing with these big hexes, these big, cool plastic hexes that have these little triangle slots in them. And as you're playing, you're throwing down these little triangle cards into those slots. And cards might be neutral terrain, or they might be people and parts of the human world, or they may be elements of the natural world. And these hexes, although very abstract, are intended to represent the land, basically the world. And a lot of this game is very abstracted. I mean, you're talking about, hexes with little triangle cards in them. The thematic tie-in that I really like here is the tie-in between the balance of the natural world and the human world. Because as you're playing these cards down, and one player is nature and one player is the humans, if you were to overplay in a particular area, so for example, if there was too much of the human influence in an area, then that can get thrown off, and that player has to remove their cards from that area, and they lose all the points associated with it. And then the same thing on the natural side. And so there's this fine balance that you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to get more points in there in order to score a greater percentage of the points. But at the same time, you can't overdo it, because if you do that, then you're going to lose all of your opportunities to score points in that particular area. And there is some abstraction there, certainly, but that concept, I think, is one that I really appreciated, and I enjoy that in this game. The end.
Great pick, Chris.
I don't know, Chris. I heard a lot about hexes and triangles and points. That sounded more abstract than almost anything I've ever played. So not sure I understand that, but maybe we'll play it sometime and I'll get it.
My number 4 pick is a game called Pan Am. This is designed by, is it Funko Games, I believe? Funko Games, who doesn't name their designer. And you can buy this one over at Target. This is a fantastic game. It's done in the 50s, I believe, through the late 60s, in an era where Pan Am was expanding across the globe and flying worldwide. So who are you? You're a small airline trying to get your operation up and running and successful enough, ultimately to be bought out, at least have some of your routes bought out by Pan Am, because that's going to score you a huge chunk of cash. And that's how you win the game then, by having the most cash. So this game's fantastic if you've never seen it. The art is beautiful. It has all these the destination posters where you're trying to get landing rights or connect one end to the other to make these routes. There are all these old-timey landing posters or destination travel posters. You imagine like 1950s, go to the South Pacific and there's an old clipper ship, an old airplane Boeing flying across, delivering some mail to all these islands in the South Pacific. That's the feel you get from this game. It's beautiful. Each of the destinations is color-coded to mark the region of the world. The map that you're playing on, it's kind of this weird projection. I think Chris said there's some time. It makes you think like, oh, this is a special aviation map they must have used back when Pan Am was flying, and that's a fact. And who knows if that's a fact or not, but it makes you think that it is a fact because the way, it looks like a special map. Pan Am comes along, swoops up your route, gives you a bunch of money, and you move on to the next thing. I didn't even talk about the little airplanes. There's little dinker airplanes can cover the small routes. There's medium airplanes that go on the longer routes. So, and some of these aren't even available until a game goes along. So new technology comes available. You get these big old, I think they are the clipper ships. They're beautiful. These old Boeing airplanes with the big tail and the props that just used to fly across the Pacific. I start thinking about all this stuff when I play this game. It's a quick, fun sort of auction worker placement game. I absolutely love the theme here. Chris, I think you even had a whole party dedicated to Pan Am, or at least thematically linked with Pan Am, the board game.
I did. We linked the mechanisms, the art, the drinks, the music, a little bit of everything. But great choice, Adam. I couldn't agree with you more. And this is one that might have made my list if you hadn't so inappropriately stolen it out from underneath me.
Based on the realistic themes that Adam's picking tonight, I'm positive that Smartphone Inc. is going to make this list. So let's see if I'm right about that. Yeah, my number 3 is a game that does not have a theme set in realism, but while you're playing the game, you feel the theme 100%. This is based on H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror mythos, and that is Arkham Horror, the card game. This is a game where everything is driven by theme. It's a fantasy flight game. That's what they're known for. And there is, again, the locations. You're actually in physical places. You're interacting with those places. You're interacting with the things that are moving around and coming towards you. And there's a sense of horror, a sense of dread, flipping these things over as you're experiencing this mythos deck where things are coming off and attacking you. Every card in the deck that you're playing with, kind of the way the game plays, is you're essentially taking actions based on cards in your hand. And, how is the thematic link there? I don't know. Why do you only have access to certain actions at certain times? Who knows? Maybe you just discovered some device in that room that you're in, whatever, but they all have a great thematic link, whether it's the skills you're picking up or whether it's the items that you're working with or whether it's the characters you're working with. The monsters have their own thematic link. And a lot of this game it's a card driven game. So a lot of it's driven by the text, by the flavor text on the cards, by the story text that's written on the, on the cards that are revealed and uncovered, but it all works so well. And I don't think there's when I started thinking about this topic, about this episode, the first thing I thought of was like, that was a game that told me a story. And then I felt the story as I was going through it. I felt the dread. I felt the excitement as I was going through it. And so I think that's a great example of a mechanical link to the theme.
Tim, I really want to get up and go to the bathroom right now, but unfortunately I don't have a movement card in my hand. All right. My number 3 game
Fantastic.
is Imhotep by Phil Walker Harding, art by Miguel Coimbra and Michaela Kenley, and published by Cosmos Games. Super simple game. You're an architect in Egypt building monuments. The way that plays out is so thematically appropriate that I just find it delightful. So each turn you're taking these little cubes that you're going to use as building blocks in your temples and in your monuments. You place them on a boat because, of course, you have to put things on a boat to move them around to get into the right places. Huge stone slabs, right? and then you move them over to wherever you're going to build. And then here's the good part. I mean, here's the great part. Once you get it over there, you are actually building little monuments. If you're going to build an obelisk, you're stacking these little cubes on top of each other, just like as if they were real stone slabs. If you're building a pyramid, you are actually building a little pyramid out of these stones that you moved over. If you're building a tomb, you're laying them out in the shape of a tomb. I mean, there are all these things that just work so perfectly. And even though it's so simple, there's not much of a story here, but boy, those actions sure do feel like you're doing what the game is all about. And I just think that's amazing, even as simple as that theme may be.
Chris, when you first said this, I was like, what is he talking about? This has nothing to do with any kind. And then I was like, wait a minute. He's right. You are taking these stone things, sending them down some river, probably the Nile, and you're building these different structures. Just like you said, Chris, I can't believe it. When I played this game on Board Game Arena with you guys, I was just like, how can I get this cube over to this thing and put it here? I didn't even think about the actions and what we're actually doing. And hearing that explanation of it gets me pumped to play this game again. Now I want to go do this stuff the way I should have been doing it 5 games ago when I got my butt kicked every time.
Yeah. And it actually is so fun taking these, if you're playing it in the physical copy, which I've got at home, these big chunky chunk cubes and actually stacking them on top of each other and building things. And it is very cool.
Yeah, that's a great choice, Chris. And I never would have picked that. I never would have thought of it. But as you started talking about it, you're building a pyramid, you're building obelisks. It's great. And you're putting them on a raft to get over to or a boat to get over to the right location. Yeah. Everything makes sense there. Great pick.
My number 3 game, and I'm still in, I think, some of Tim and Chris's thunder here, is Viticulture. And this is a game by Jamie Stegmaier and Alan Stone. So when you guys introduced me to this game, I don't know if it was Tim or Tim and Chris both got a game going on, I think, Board Game Arena. And I was just like, what is this? This isn't going to make any sense. I'm going to have to build weird stuff and move some cubes around, play some cards. It all makes sense. What are you doing? You're a wine farmer. Is that a vintner? Is that right? Or vintners in this. And you're growing your own winery, your vineyard. So what do you have to do? You have to acquire the grapes. Then you have to get a field ready. Then you plant the grapes and the grapes grow. And then you have to harvest them. Then you have to smash them and turn them into wines. Then those wines age. But in order to supplement your farm, you have to get some irrigation. You have to get a trellis. You have to get a little bit of this different technology to grow these different type of grapes that prefer those kind of growing conditions. You let the wine age. After it's in your cellar, you have to get a bigger cellar so you can hold more wine. Once it ages enough, you fill these orders, the different types of wine that's being desired by the customers. It is all so thematic. The first time I played this, I was like, this is amazing. It makes so much sense. The actions that you're doing in this game, it feels like you're running a grape farm. And I think that's pretty darn neat. Some of the weird parts, the mamas and the papas, I guess that's like the owners and the special skills they bring. Some of the visitors.
I think that's your inheritance. So that's what you've inherited. You've inherited like some fortune or some components that you get to start with, some part of the business.
Okay. And the cards are all pretty, it's some sort of expert or special client that knows what they're doing, or some guest that'll give you visitors that'll give you some weird points and this and that. So, and none of them are too wacky. They're all within the realm of plausibility. They all kind of make sense. Oh, I could do this and then gain this point, or I could do this and I'm going to have to pay a couple of points to do that, but it'll help me in the long term. So some neat choices that just work thematically for me. That's Viticulture.
Yeah, this is a great choice. And again, it does use worker placement. So you can kind of feel hey, I've got 4, people working for me. One is the overseer. He can kind of work wherever he wants to, but they're going to go out and take these common spaces. There's some things that don't work as anything, especially why do you turn a red grape and a white grape into a blush? Why do you turn 2 red grapes and a white grape into a sparkling wine? But, you can overlook that. There's so much other fun stuff that's going on here that makes sense thematically. The visitor cards, based on the name of the card, try to give you some abilities that would kind of fit with them. So I think this is a really great choice.
Yeah, I got to agree with Tim on this one, Adam. Great choice. I love this game. And this is one where I think it's a really great example of how a great integration can turn something that otherwise might not be a particularly interesting game into a really exciting game. I remember back when I first started playing,
I was pretty biased against games that didn't have a pretty fantastical theme. And I remember seeing Viticulture and thinking, why in the world would I ever want to play a game about making wine? That sounds so boring. But then the first time I played it, the way that those mechanisms, the way that those actions just fit so nicely into the story of somebody making wine, the elegance of it, it was so exciting to me seeing the way that worked with all those pieces together that I fell in love. Great choice.
Thanks guys. I didn't even mention like the summer working season versus the winter working season. There's some actions you can do in the summer, some actions you can do in the winter. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah, and this is a great example too, Adam, of you mentioned how sometimes the theme helps drive explaining the game, helps the rules, helps the teach of it. And I taught this to a couple people who are not generally into heavy games recently. My wife, my friend Jen, who's been on the show. And what was fun about it is that I kind of taught the spaces, but they just got it, right? They're just like, oh, of course I have to harvest my grapes before I can turn it into wine, right? It just like I have to plant the grapes. I have to, there's a flow that just makes sense. And so it just helps teach the game. And it was really easy for them to get into. So I appreciate that. And I think that's a great example where theme actually makes the game easier to understand.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to follow on with that with a game that I think is very similar, and it's about running a farm. So this is Agricola, and I think Jamie Stegmaier actually was inspired by Agricola when he was making Viticulture. Of course, he added some extra flourishes to Viticulture to change things up a little bit. But I think that when I'm playing Agricola, I feel the sense of running a medieval farm, right? You're two people, you got a couple places out in the town where you can go, and maybe you can go fishing, maybe you can go, gather some food, but you can start to learn occupations, you can start to grow, and these occupations are thematic. What they are, they give you special skills based on what they are. You can also start to kind of improve on your farm. You can build these improvements that are thematic, that make sense for what you're doing. And then you're going to start to actually build up your farm so that you can live off of it. You're going to start to sow your fields. You're going to plant these grains, and the grains, the way that the grains and the vegetables work as you plant them is that over a few seasons they'll produce, but eventually they'll stop producing. So you got to plant more in order to keep them producing. And then you're going to add animals to your farm, but you can't do that if it's not fenced in. They're going to run away. So you got to build fences with wood that you've collected. You're going to build fences in your farm. You're going to put the animals in the fences. And if you got enough animals, they're going to start to reproduce. If you don't eat them all first, because you can do that too, because you do have to feed your farm, your farmers, the couple that are living there, and then they have some kids, and the kids help. That's another worker. It's another person you can send out to do things, but then you got to feed them. So you have to have more food. Maybe you got to eat a few more of your sheep at the end of the season in order to do that. Everything about this game was made to be thematic, and it works, and it's fun. I just love Agricola, and I love it, I think, because even if it's not a theme that I'm excited about, it's a game where I feel the theme every time I'm taking an action in it, and I just love it.
Yeah, I remember hearing the episode that you guys did on this one. It was one that I was not involved in, and you made a comment similar to that, Tim, and it felt like everybody just piled on giving you crap about that. And I have to agree. It's a strange theme. It's not an exciting theme, but the tie-in between the theme, it is very similar to Viticulture. The tie-in between the theme and the actions is so tight and so cool that I can forgive the fact that it's about having a farm in pre-industrial Europe.
As much as I want to fight you on this one, I have to agree too. The theme is there, and it does feel like you're a struggling medieval farmer. But is that fun? That's a different question. A lot of people seem to think it is.
This is not the top 5 most fun games, Adam. It's just thematic right here.
That's right.
So my number 2 is a game that I think you guys will groan when you hear the game, but I don't think you can groan about the theme on this one. And that is Root by Cole Worley with art by Kyle Farron, published by Leader Games. So first of all, this is one of the most entertaining stories in games right now. It's all these little woodland creatures that are engaged in this power struggle in the forest. And you've got all of your different factions. You've got the cats, who are the ones trying to take over the forest. And then you've got the birds, who used to be in charge of the forest, but now the cats have kind of taken over, and they've fallen into disarray because they've got a bunch of different, a bunch of leaders who all think they're in charge. And then you've got the Woodland Alliance, where they pop up out of nowhere and can take over a town by insurrection. and the otters who are kind of like the mercenaries. They sell access to their boats. And then there's probably, I think, 5 other different expansion factions that you can use. And every single one has a piece to tell of that story. And every time you play a game of this, it's like you're watching a movie play out. It's so entertaining and to see. And the factions are so interesting. And the way that the mechanisms tie in to the gameplay and the theme, even if you love this game or hate this game, and I know that you guys are not huge fans, but you can't deny that this is a game where the theme is tied in so nicely that it's hard not to appreciate that.
This one's a little tricky for me, Chris, because the way you talk about it, yes, there's all these different factions, and you can totally recognize, oh, this is the guerrilla faction. This is the Imperials who have always had control. This is sort of the underground rebellion. These are the factions that are selling all the weapons. They're all there and they're all recognizable, but it's the cutesy cartoon art that really disconnects for me. You have these little playful things, and all of a sudden these guys are slaughtering each other in the woods. What's going on here? So, yeah, I can see what you're saying, but also just that disconnect, it makes me feel weird. It makes me feel a little queasy.
Oh, dude, wait, hold on. The disconnect is what makes this game so awesome. It's the fact that you have, like, the Death Star isn't these, like, stormtroopers. It's cats. And that the insurrectionists are like these little chipmunks and things like that. I mean, that's half the fun.
Yeah, I totally disagree with Adam on this. The art does make it fun, and it doesn't take away from the theme. You just have to be a little fantastical again. I think this is one of those areas where I can't disagree with you, Chris. And I don't think it's a bad game. I just don't think it's a game for me that's worth all the effort learning it. But I think there's a lot of great thematic tie-in here. But you have to ask yourself, like, what are you doing? You're making set collection. You're looking for symbols on the corners of cards, right? This is one of those areas where, like, some of the mechanisms don't make sense thematically, but the story the game is telling, and the way you spread across the map, and the way that the insurrectionists rise up and blow up the like all the people on one space, like all of that stuff does have a great thematic tie. So I think this is a great pick, Chris. I wish I thought of it.
I'm going to come back again and say, so people walk into a board game store, oh, look at these cute animals. Maybe they've never played a board game before. Look at this beautiful art and these cute animals. I want this game. It looks so fun. I guess there's been millions of copies sold worldwide, whatever the number is. It's a very popular game. And you get it, and then you're opening this box. You've never played board games before, and you have all these different asymmetric factions you got to learn. All these different movement rules and battle rules and just different. It's a complex game, and the interaction between these factions is tough. So just that thematic disconnect is another one that's confusing for us. It's a tough sell.
Objection, irrelevant.
I can't believe we're still arguing about this.
Oh my gosh, you guys. All right. Well, a game that is totally thematically integrated is Leaving Earth. This is a game by Joseph Fatula, and he also did the art for this game. And it's beautiful. This is published by the Luminaris Group Incorporated. First of all, you're playing as one of many countries from Earth developing a space program. That makes sense. That's easy to imagine that happening. When I play this game, I put on my short sleeve button-up shirt and a slightly too short of a tie. I tuck that into my slacks and slide on my loafers. I pull the pin out of my pocket protector and get ready to algebra the darndest heck out of this small game.
I love that picture you just painted, Adam.
So that's exactly the picture that the game paints. Take a look at this. It has that sort of art from the 50s, the so-called golden era. And you imagine these NASA scientists with their dark-rimmed glasses, thick glasses, going into work, driving their Studebaker cars. Anyway, it's taking place over the next 20 years. And what you have to do, you have to choose a destination or a mission. You're choosing the type of rocket, the payload you want to take, the people you want to equip the mission with, what astronauts are going to be on there. And then you have to plan out your movement and your fuel cost. There's also a little bit of math. You can use a little slide rule if you want. You have to pay for gravity costs, account for radiation, the passage of time, and the unknown. Because after all that careful planning, your rockets can still just blow up. So that part of the game was a little frustrating to me. I guess that's thematic because how many rockets have you seen that have just gone catastrophic? Sad, but very true.
Few.
I chose to sell this game not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And also,
now there's a thematic tie-in.
And also, I sold it to a friend of mine who had an interest, so it wasn't that hard of a choice. I moved on with this game, but it's beautiful. If you haven't seen it, if you want to get your math on and calculate fuel gravity equations to get out there, you can do that with this game. That's Leaving Earth.
I did not know you'd ever played this game, Adam. That's cool. I had heard about this game. I think that each copy is kind of handmade, and so from my understanding is that if you order it, like you order it from their site directly, it's going to take you several months before you'll ever get a copy of it because they have to kind of produce it.
I think I found a few copies at that giant board game store up in Portland.
Okay.
Up by your neck of the woods, Chris. So I picked one up when I was up there one time.
This is the first game that has come up tonight that I have never heard of before, but I'm looking at it now on BGG, and I can totally see what you're saying. And I don't like math at all, but I love the idea of this game.
It does not. It's never sounded fun to me, and it may be fun. It might be an interesting puzzle. It has never sounded fun to me, but it does sound very thematic. Can't deny that.
Yeah, funness was not at the forefront of this game for me.
All right, well, let's get into our number one. So my number one, and I've been saying this for years, since I first played it, before I had even played that many board games, is one of the games that I get introduced to pretty early in the hobby. And this is Outlive. This is by Le Bois de Joux. This is a French company. And boy, this game is thematic to me. Every time I'm playing it, you just feel the theme. It's a post-apocalyptic theme where you are some struggling survivors just trying to live, just trying to make your way through after some major disaster, some nuclear holocaust or something like that. So you have people, and it's kind of like the worker placement idea where you can, you've got the sense of somebody has to go out and do a task. But in this case, you've got a few different groups of people that are out moving around in this area and trying to collect resources and trying to fend off other raiders, other scavengers. And you're trying to get all these things so you can go back to your shelter at night and try to build up the shelter and help sustain it and help invite other survivors in there. And you just feel the theme throughout, and the fact that your survivors die because you can't feed them, and the fact that you are just struggling to get the resources you need to live. And then you've got these things you find that you can turn into weapons, and these rooms that you can build up in your shelter that kind of give you extra benefits. Everything about it is driven by theme, maybe to a fault in some cases, because it is a little bit fiddly to set up and to maintain the rounds, and it's painful sometimes. But I love how the theme carries through here, and the game is always enjoyable to me because of that. So I had to call Outlive out as my number one most thematic game.
So Adam, to a fault, talk about that.
This game was just rough. I must have been the post-apocalyptic faction that had all the Hollywood writers, or I don't know, the people that wouldn't do so well. Sorry to all the Hollywood writers out there to listen to our show. The people that might not have the best survival skills, the people that skipped Boy Scouts. That was my faction. We didn't know where to look. We didn't know what to do with the microchips we found. We argued over the water. Our one piece of deer meat we had, we squandered. It rotted, I'm pretty sure. There was a lot of death and decay in our little hole-up site that we had. Things went just horribly bad, which I guess that's all thematically possible. So excellent choice, Tim.
I couldn't agree more with you, Tim. Great choice.
The only list where Adam agreed with me on it.
All right, so my number one game is the one game on the list that I haven't actually played, but I know enough about it to be able to put it on the list in my number one spot. And that is Final Girl by Evan Derrick and AJ Porfirio, with art by Tyler Johnson and Roland McDonald, and published by Van Ryder Games. This is a game where you play as the archetypal final girl in a horror movie, trying to escape the mad killer and save as many people as you can, as well as saving yourself. So there's a lot of things in this game that are thematic in a very basic sense. You're moving around, you're running away from the killer, you are attacking the killer, you're trying to find items that you can use to attack the killer or to save yourself, whatever. There's a million of these little things in there. But there's a lot of games that have that kind of stuff. And it is very thematic, but it's very thematic in a very basic way. But the thing that gets me so excited about this game, and the thing that I find so clever about the thematic tie-in, is the very nature of this game itself. Because to be the final girl, you have to be one person, and this is a solo only game. If you don't have a solo game for this, you can't have the game, because there can't be a final girl with other people around. You can't have other people interacting. You can't have somebody being the monster. It has to be a solo game. And the fact that they did that, I think, is so cool and so clever, and is such it honestly, as soon as I saw this, it brings me right back to all those movies I watched in the 80s, like Friday the 13th and The Nightmare on Elm Street and all of those. And in every single one of those, it's that one person running away from the crazed killer at the end of the movie that makes the movie. And that's what this game does by making it a solo only game, on top of all the other cool stuff that you get to do too. But I love that about this game.
Chris, this is such a cool pick. I have not played this game either, but I've heard some really cool things. And one of my favorite things that I heard about it, which is a great thematic mechanism, is that a serial killer or whatever, the bad guy, you got to take care of. So part of that is doing damage to them over the course of the game. And so it probably, to me, it feels like it's probably going to be like at the end of Cthulhu Death May Die, where you got to fight the big bad. And, you just barely, maybe, 25% of the time you actually manage to kill the killer, right? You manage to take them out. But apparently at the start of the game, you randomly pull this chip out that once you kill the killer, then you flip this chip over and it dictates whether that killer gets back up and has more health again, or whether they're actually dead. Like every great killer, like serial killer movie or horror movie where the killer isn't quite dead at the end of it. And I just love that they added that there. I had to mention, though, there's one funny thing about the production on this game, which it has a really cool looking production. This map, you got this mini for the final girl, you got the mini for the killer. And then you have a bunch of little meeples that are the victims. The killers are going to be killing during the killer is going to be taken out during the course of the game, but they're just like little classic meeples. And it feels like a really weird production choice, probably a little bit cheaper. But anyway, the game seems very thematic, and it is actually one that I'd like to give a shot to.
And I do have to chime in on the thing that you just said, Tim. And that is the one place where I did feel like this game fell down, which is the thing with the meeples. Because notwithstanding all that stuff that I just said about how the final girl has to be the final girl, there are all these other victims that are sitting around doing, I don't know, nothing really, or being saved. And that was a little bit of a bummer, because that takes away a little bit from the theme. But other than that, I think it's delightful. And the thing you said about the chip where you can, the killer may or may not get up at the end, that's pretty great. Another thing that is really cool thematically about this is the horror track. There's a horror track that affects how well you can do any action that you take. So you do dice rolls to see if you're successful at what you want to do. And the higher you go up on the horror track, in other words, how scared you are, the less likely you are to be successful doing whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's where the victims tie in here, right? Like every good horror movie, you have a bunch of people that get killed first, and it raises the horror of the final girl. And that's where the theme comes in. I don't think the victims are supposed to be there at the end. I think that's kind of what the killer is going around doing that while you're trying to build up your character, from my understanding. So I think they're trying to still build in that horror movie theme with those. Just don't know why they had to like separate so much from the plastic minis versus the little brightly colored wooden meeples from a production perspective.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my number one game for thematic integration, and this was no surprise for me. This was the first one that came right to my mind. This is Baseball Highlights 2045. It's by Mike Fitzgerald and Eagle Griffin Games. And this game is a deck building game that simulates a baseball game. And just a warning for you guys, I'm about to throw around a lot of lingo, so throw in your sports to English translators if you have them. Each card is a baseball player, and their abilities correspond to what they might do in the full course of a baseball game. So one card might have a defensive play or highlight that might say double play, defensive play, and then it might have a number of hits on it, like single, double, single. And then their associated speed. So each of these cards is either slow or average or fast. You get 6 cards in your hand. 6 cards are, one card's on deck. That makes a little more sense. And the rest of the cards are on the bench. Or I think it might even be called like in the dugout. So did I lose you guys already? You guys know any of this terminology? Anyway, it's all baseball terminology. How do you win this game? You win by having the most runs at the end of the game. I hope you guys can follow that part. That's pretty quick. So after each game, there's a draft. This is where it kind of falls apart, but it's still freaking cool. There's a little market of cards, right? And these cards are how you upgrade your deck. Each player that you played has a value, a monetary value of how many jerseys they might sell or how popular they are. How much revenue are these players going to bring in? So you take that revenue, you apply it to these market of cards the next game, and then you have to maintain your roster size, right? You can't have over the limit of players. So for every card you draft, you send one of your players on your team down to the minors. That's how you're culling your cards. They go to the minor leagues. I think that's just fantastic. I talked about the fast and slow and medium runners. Fast runners can go first to third on a single. That's exactly like baseball. Slow runners only advance one base at a time. You have to force them around the bases. That's like the catcher or the pitcher might be on in baseball. Some players, some of the cards are eligible to pinch hit. So this means you can discard it. If it's not working for that situation, you can discard the card and you can use the guy from your on deck circle, or you can top deck it. Hopefully you know what might be in that chunk of cards that are on your bench or in the dugout. I think you grab one of those and you flip it over. Maybe a clutch hit comes up and you get a home run out of nowhere. It's fantastic. It's exciting. This is where the theme falls down a little bit. You can use your on deck player as they might have a pitching ability, which can give you a save. If you're the visitor, you can play this card to kind of cancel out the other guy's hit in a last-ditch effort to either win the game, like a closer might do in baseball, or to keep the game tied and push it into extra innings. There's extra innings in this game, and that's exciting too. You put out 3 cards, pick one, they resolve simultaneously, so the theme falls apart there a little bit. But overall, this game is so cool, and it fits so well. The way the art's done, it's all Americana, all kind of sepia tone, vintagey baseball. All the players' names are recognizable. There's like Babe Bench and Barry Sosa, and all these names that are recognizable if you follow baseball at all. You don't have to like baseball to enjoy this game, but it certainly helps. And for me, that's a home run. Tim, you played this one. I know you're not the biggest baseball fan. I wish you were, because those mechanisms just fit right in with baseball. How did it feel for you from from either a thematic standpoint or a deck building standpoint?
Well, I had a lot of fun playing this game, just the gameplay mechanisms, and I can understand where the theme plays. There is some weirdness about like how, you're both flipping a card at the same time. So you're doing the offense and the defense. Is that the right term? Anyway, at the same time, and so that's a little weird. And then also, Adam, I'm surprised you included this because it is a little fantastical since they're actual androids and like robots out on the field. But no, I totally get it. I think it makes perfect sense. Obviously, the designers were trying to tie in everything you could in baseball into this simple little deck building game. I think it's a good pick.
Yeah, good point about the cyborgs and the robots being in there. That is this game takes place in 2045, so we got a few years to get there. Maybe, but it's not looking like there'll be some sort of cyborg human relations baseball league in the near future here.
And Adam, I am not a baseball guy, but I sure do appreciate the concept of this game. I'd love to try this.
Great.
That wraps up our top 5 games with integrated themes. I hope you enjoyed this show. This is something we care a lot about, and we're excited to play and find more games that where the theme really ties in. So if you have any suggestions, hit us up on Twitter or Facebook at this point. Who cares? Maybe even drop us an email. I don't know. Find us on Board Game Geek. In some way, communicate with us about what your top games with integrated themes are. We'd love to hear about it. That'll wrap up this episode. If you would like to follow us, as mentioned, find us on Twitter at BG_hot-takes. And we would love it if you would rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.